Hiya, right, okay. I've got a whole bundle of mics.
Should we drop right on this? Yeah.
I'll put them here. Where are we?
We're just coming down the line saying hello to everybody. It's Mark.
Thank you. Hiya.
Hi. So.
This is great. So we've all introduced ourselves.
I'm just starting. I'm just beginning. Next to Mark is No Impact Man, you may know. Colin Bevan. One of the best known gestures against the ravages of consumption was the 12 months in which No Impact Man did not burn fossil fuels or return non-recyclable waste to the earth. This became a theatrical demonstration and high bar for getting off the grid. His blog, book, and movie from his experience created a world of activist possibility for thousands of people around the world who yearn for an earth-friendly life. His book, How to Be Alive, will be published in January. And you guys all know Mark.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, we're on a little conversation about activism, about tonight's show, and then hopefully open it up to you guys for some questions that you may have for Mark, for the Reverend, for Savitri, for Colin. So I'm going to just get us started. Great. Just going to get the conversation rolling, and hopefully I can then peel off into the distance here.
Okay.
Okay. So
Nick,
I would
have
like
you been
to
an
start.
activist at all? Like, what?
Well, you want my biography? Guys.
We want you to stand up and say, I'm Nick and I haven't had a drink in 18 weeks.
I'm not going to get into my past. So let's just start with, would you guys like to react to tonight's piece? How did it strike you? Were you surprised to hear that one of Mark's collaborators was a mole? Have you heard of instances similar to Mark's story in your own work or people around you? Any other reactions you may have to tonight's piece, just to get us rolling?
I have this general feeling, which is a very special feeling. It's a rare feeling, and that is I think Mark is making a difference in the world.
Me too.
I do my best. You have good days and bad days. Do you know what I mean?
Don't you have that feeling?
Yes. Well, I mean, many of us have that feeling about you. So.
No, but that's the point. It's actually all of us have something to give. All of us do. I know I've spoken for most of the evening, and I apologise for just
jumping right in. It's your name.
But there's a guy I know who's a fantastic guy whose name is Karim Yildiz. And whenever activists come up to me, or people come up and say, "But what can we do?" I always go, "There's a guy called Karim Yildiz, and he was the first Kurdish prisoner of conscience, and he was tortured horribly. He was released, and he then went to Ireland, and he studied human rights. And for his final dissertation, he wrote a piece on how Turkey could be taken to the European Court of Human Rights as they were a co-signatory to the Convention on Human Rights. And his lecturer said, can I show this to people? And he said, yes. After a couple of weeks, he came back and said, I think people want to fund this. Do you want to run this project? So he set up the Kurdish Human Rights Project. He took Turkey to the court. I mean, he took them to the court and won money. He got justice for the poorest people, the most repressed people on this planet. He found Turkey guilty in the court of entire village destruction, 3,000 villages, of murder, of extrajudicial killing, of rape as state policy in the region. And he won compensation, and he got the UN to describe Turkey as a place that has state-sanctioned torture in the southeast because of his work. He's a remarkable man. He really is a remarkable man, and he's now involved in the negotiations with Abdullah Öcalan and the Turkish state on release and going forward with the Kurds. And when I tell people this story, they go, well, that's a really remarkable man. How on earth can we do anything like that? And I say, well, you don't. Very few of us are able to do anything that approaches that. That every one of us can write the letter for amnesty that got him released. Every single one of us can just do that little thing that got him out. And so I think there's always something that all of us can do.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question a minute ago, some of the people on that last screen we've worked with in England, and so we're familiar with those stories that came out recently, with not so recently now, but of internal spying on campaigners there. And certainly here we know of many instances of that. I think that in the United States we have a very difficult time calling it corporate spying. I think we don't like to give it a name. It just settles into a kind of paranoia in the activist movements. We can't decide if it's cops or corporations or, and I guess what I am left with from your show most of all is just that I'm really moved that people keep doing activism after those things, you know, and I know like in Nottingham they had a really hard time that community was blown apart by that, and you know, and it was very painful and upsetting for people, but a lot of them are getting back to work now, and I'm really struck by that. What is it that gets us back to work after that kind of betrayal? And I also think that maybe in England you demand more of your government than we do here. I think you still hold them accountable in a way that I think a lot of people in the left and in progressive movements in the United States that we have given up on.
You meet them on the tube.
Well, but also you say like
I'm
these
not
are our
going to
laws.
meet a congressman on the
Very
F train.
So I admire that because I feel like here it's just de facto. It's just what happens. It's what they're going to do to us, and we've given up on even caring that. You know, we file FOIA requests occasionally, or we try to get our files occasionally. They're always lost. We can't ever get them. But then, do we file that second or third suit? You know, no, because it's actually like it takes us so far away from our work. So the destabilizing force of spying is what you know fascinates me. You know how it actually does take your eyes off the activism.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad for your revenge fucks because you know you beat it because you got back to work.
Yeah.
You know, and I really admire you for that.
I think there's a really interesting thing because my limited amount of knowledge about spying in the US, certainly we know the NRA has infiltrated the gun control lobby. We know the Koch brothers have actually put spies in, you know, so
There's a great piece in the New Yorker that just came out about that.
well, you know,
Yeah.
this is a really significant thing. My view on this was people had various reactions to it, and often they'd say, "Well, what else do you expect?"
Right.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
A lot of that going on.
A lot of it.
And I think it's also important to, I mean, we were talking about a bunch of activists, and in some ways, you're combatants, you know, and so you expect the enemy, as it were, to do it. But I think it's also important to point out that here in the United States, we have the NSA and the GCHQ, who are also complicit with the big. They're handing information about us to the big corporations when the corporations want it. They're not just using it for terrorism.
I think you're absolutely right.
And so that means that you're a special case of being spied upon, but I think it's important to say that this is not something that's just happening to activists. It's something that all of us. What do you call it when they go fishing for a certain kind of fish and you get by-kill, and we're all by-kill in the dragnet.
Absolutely. Because it happened over a period of time, we had time to let each impact sort of build up amongst us. So all the people who you saw, all of us, Gid, Emily, Laura and I, and to an extent Nick, although he was sort of slightly removed, all of us went through a very similar set of feelings at roughly the same time. All of us had the same sort of impact. We were embarrassed and hugely shocked and angry, but really embarrassed. This awful shame that we had allowed it to happen. And then we kind of overcame that and we just got really cross. And then we had this other thing where we just thought, well, we don't know what to do now. And we just sort of went away. And then there was this feeling of, no, we can't let this fucker get away with it. And it actually took time for those things to work through. Now, if Martin had done this now, it's very bizarre because I actually went and spoke to some lawyers and said, can I do this guy for invasion of privacy? And the lawyers were great. They just said, yeah, you're 6 months too late on the time limit to do it, but you could have. And so one of the things that we like to do now is like, if people find out, get them to a lawyer. Get them to a lawyer and look at all those avenues, because there's always all sorts of avenues that we've got. And actually, I'm always cross with myself for the way that I reacted in being, embarrassed. And and fearful and all those things that
And
you
human,
get.
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
Yeah.
you know, actually, we're activists. We're supposed to
I
be
know.
doing stuff.
I know.
And then when it suddenly hits you, you go, oh, and that's just useless. You know, the whole point of being an activist is to be effective.
Yeah.
You know.
Can I ask you about his motivation? You mentioned that his house was not well kept and he clearly didn't have a lot of money. But is it possible that he was blackmailed?
It is possible. I have no idea, and I try and avoid speculating on what he did, because this is a story of deception, and so I've tried to stick really rigorously to the bits that we actually know. Also, there is inside the show a Reynolds defence, and we put it in there for good manners. And a Reynolds defence is a journalistic defence in law, which means when you've got 99% of the evidence, but you're not quite at the bit where they've said, yeah, all right, I did it, then you can still publish if you present the facts that you do have, and you get a right to reply. You put all the allegations to that person, and you get their response. And actually in the show, just for good manners and for good housekeeping, we've structured that in so that Martin's right to reply is always in. His privacy is protected. We have not done what he did. We, you know, you won't show his face, and we won't expose him to the ridicule. And we'll try and stay on the story. And so it's hard to speculate. In the show, you can't deviate from that. I suspect he enjoyed getting one over everyone.
The control.
Well,
Yeah.
right, and also, you know, a good liar, most of it is not a lie, right? So on some level also, he probably agreed with a lot of what you were doing. Obviously, to pull the lie off, he had to be 93% in, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Gid and Martin first really bonded when I did that show about Indonesia and the general, and 2 weeks later there was a debate in Parliament on arms sales. And Gid and Martin get into the House of Parliament public gallery, and they photocopied banknotes and covered them with paint, so it's blood money. And because banknotes don't show up on an X-ray when you go through, they get into the public gallery. There was no kind of covered glass in front of it, and they're in the middle of this debate, and they jump up, blood on your hands, and all this money goes across Parliament with blood on it. And Gid and Martin are arrested, and the House of Parliament has a dungeon. They have a dungeon there, and Gid and Martin spent the afternoon locked up in the dungeon. And I remember saying to them, were you frightened? And Martin and Gid giggled and said, no, it's because the bloke who locked us up was the sergeant in arms, so his trousers only came down to his knee, and he had black stockings and buckles on his boots. But that was the moment when they bonded. Do you know what I mean? That was the time, and everyone has those little moments when, and I think Martin thoroughly enjoyed it.
I think there's another interesting thing I just want to bring up, you know, because I feel like, you know, it's so rare that a person like myself, who's at the top of the food chain, you know, like a college-educated white American, you know, has to deal with this kind of tension, right? Am I being watched? Am I being repressed in this, or am I being surveilled? Am I? But I feel like there's so many people in the world who are constantly in the state. Like in this city, you know, just riding your bike home, if you're a person of color, you're being surveilled, right? If you live on Avenue D, there's an eye in the sky cop watching you all the time. If you walk out the door of your building, someone's looking at you. If you walk in the stairs, someone's patrolling right behind you. I mean, so it's interesting for us to contemplate this and look at, and it's real. I'm not saying it's nothing, it's real, but it's a really also a good way for us to see into how a lot of other people feel all the time. And I think, you know, it grows in, like, certainly in activist circles, it grows compassion, I think, and empathy for that state.
I completely agree. There's a very weird, we had there was a 2-day conference when all the various people who'd been spied upon got together. And so we had the construction blacklist, we had the corporate spies, we had the women who'd had relationships with undercover cops, we had all sorts of people who'd been spied upon, and we had the family justice campaigns. Now, the family justice campaigns in the UK are cases like the Stephen Lawrence campaign. Stephen Lawrence was the victim of a racist murder, and the police did not investigate it, despite being given the name of the murderers by people in the community. And it has taken decades of campaigning to get a full investigation into the police investigation, which found that there was institutional racism within the police, and to get 2 of the 4 killers in jail. 2 of them are now jailed. It was a really bloody and awful stain. There is now an investigation into the police who are accused of being in the pockets of criminals who were related to the killers. And the police spied on them. The police spied on the Stephen Lawrence family. And so the families, the Families for Justice campaigns were all there in this room, and it was an incredible thing because it was the first time we'd all really got together. And it was a really amazing thing. And one of the people there, one of the women whose brother was killed by the police, a guy called Christopher Alder, who was suffocated by the police in the back of a van and then died in the cell, actually. But this all happened in the van. So she said, how do you find trust anymore? How can you trust anyone? And you know the great thing, and it dawned on me at that point, the great thing about all of our work, the great thing about any activism, the great thing about any progressive law that changes, it's because of us working together and trusting each other. It's actually trust that holds us all together, and it is trust that pushes it forward. And trust is too precious to be taken from us. And that was a really important realization when all of us came together. I saw you had your hand up, sorry.
Are you taking questions from the
Sure. Yes, we are.
A couple of questions. One is, could you explain, I'm not familiar with the law as it relates to, are they allowed to spy on your organization? Was that against the law? Was there any law pertaining to it to begin with?
The laws, there are no laws about corporate spying.
That's what I'm trying to get.
So there's no law about that. But there are human rights. The right to privacy, the right for freedom of speech, the right for freedom of association, the right to form trade unions, the right to work together to campaign.
Yeah, well, I have another question, but let me be specific. Let's assume Martin, we'll assume he's guilty. Let's assume that he found out some information that you had, and he reported it back to whoever was employing him. Is that under English law or US law illegal?
It would be illegal if I brought a private prosecution under the Human Rights Act.
Explain.
The Human Rights Act is UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Give me an example of what.
Okay, well, very, very simply, there is a set of rights that we all have that the police don't necessarily have to enforce. In fact, quite often they do exactly the opposite. However, if I choose to bring a court case against someone and say they invaded my privacy and bring a private prosecution, right, instead of the state and the police and the prosecutors bringing a prosecution, I bring a private prosecution. I can try and get them into court for invasion of privacy and for breaching my right
I have a
to
more
organise.
specific question, but let me just give you, just so I understand the cursory nature of it. Martin is in your organization. You people are going to have a demonstration on X amount of day and X amount of time. He reports back to whoever he's employed that, hey, I found out they're having this demonstration at X amount. Is that a problem? Can you do anything about that?
When you say it's a problem,
No, forget about problems.
Okay.
Can you do anything about him bringing that information back to BEA? Or BEA?
Yes, but the only way we can do it is through that private prosecution.
And you're bringing it on what basis?
That he invaded our privacy. I look at it like this. If a police officer wants to come into my house
Right.
and get information from me
Yes.
and take things from my home, they have to get a warrant. They have to go through a judicial process with oversight. Corporate spies don't have to do that. They befriend you, and they go straight into your house. So as far as I'm concerned, this is operating without a warrant, and I believe that you take this quite seriously in this country.
So it's difficult for you to come against it. My basic question is, take the human rights situation. I think obviously what you did, you know, in terms of Indonesia and things like that, you know, commendable, and everybody, you know, almost everybody would be for that. But what happens when the human rights organization becomes political, or they become economic, and they do things for political reasons or economic reasons, i.e. oil or something else? What happens then?
Well, I think any decent campaigning organisation is political. It seems pretty pointless if you're going up against a repressive regimes and, you know, not being political. You have to be political. I'm not quite sure what you mean by
the other way around. What happens when edicts come out of the human rights organization, which are based on political and economic intuitives?
Mm-hmm. We have an equivalent in the United States. It was discovered that a number of the big environmental NGOs were investing in fossil fuel.
Mm-hmm.
They had taking money from fossil fuel companies,
from big companies.
And the Wildlife Conservancy was found to have an actual well that it was leasing. So Naomi Klein revealed, it's right, you all know this, about last year?
The Nature Conservancy.
Was it the Nature Conservancy?
The Nature Conservancy.
So we were all taken aback. I mean, it was just, and it gave us a kind of, a combination feeling of, I'm glad I'm small. I'm glad I have a small budget. I'm glad I felt the nobility in not being, But then these environmental organizations, they just harvest money. There are like about 15 of them with budgets of over $100 million each year. Just huge. And then we started wondering, will that continue? How bad would their behavior be before people would start saying, well, let's give money to this other activist over here, this other smaller outfit. So the presence of fossil fuel money in those big NGOs did, if you look at it, completely change their behavior. Sierra Club accepting millions of dollars from Mike Bloomberg, a big fracker, completely changed their attitude on the ground, the way they act around us, the way they talk to people in public, the kinds of statements they give to the newspapers.
This goes to the fact that none of the environmental organizations will discuss that the consumption-based economy is the problem. Because they're all getting their money from corporations of one kind or another who are invested in us, all working our rear ends off to buy a bunch of shit we don't need, right? And that's what's supposed to be for the good of personkind. But a big frustration for me in the environmental movement is that they won't talk about that. That they talk about making I call it rubberizing the playground. We'll have a renewable energy economy, but we'll still work 14 hours a day, we'll still have gigantic injustice, and it will still be based on the spin-off money from consumption, right? So it's a problem.
No, but your point is incredibly well taken, and I think that's what I was gearing to. For instance, we're big contributors to the Innocence Project. I've seen one of these things on television where they got somebody off, and I said, holy crap, if I don't call up and give money to this thing, there's something wrong with me. Because there are people who are obviously in prison who shouldn't be in prison because of poor prosecution or malicious prosecution.
Yeah.
Let me get back to the human rights thing, and I'll give my bias here, since when I give this type of thing. You have a situation. In other words, I know that you all are dedicated people. What happens when the human rights organization makes, and you may disagree with me on what I'm about to say, but if you take the Israeli-Palestinian situation, especially what happened in Gaza and things like that, it appeared to me that it was one-sided, more towards against the Israelis and for Hamas or Hezbollah and people in that area. When you look at this thing, it was so obvious as to what was happening. And you just knew, I mean, I've been in the corporate world a long time, you just knew there had to be payoffs there. You just knew that some of the people in the Human Rights Commission were getting kickbacks.
Well, but I think this is why we go back to trust, right? So we could talk about those things a lot tonight. We could talk about that. But I think, at the end of the day, where are we getting the information in the first place? How are we making decisions? I think we have to return to who we're in the room with as activists, as people who are trying to change the world. Who are we in the room with? And you do have to take a kind of leap of faith that sometimes it's not who you think you're in the room with, right? You spend years organizing with a cop or, that's certainly happened to lots of people we know, but you still have to work with what you know. I don't know. I think at this point in my life as an activist, speculating about, whether media stories are swaying towards the IDF or toward Hezbollah, I just can't even go there because I really have no idea. And probably most of us actually have no idea, maybe you do because you actually work in those fields a lot, right?
Well,
and you surround yourself with actual
I
information,
also,
people on the ground.
I walked the length of the Israeli wall and used it as a hike, used the wall as a route map. So I went over and spent 3 months walking on the ground, talking to everyone who would talk to me. And the one group of people who were guaranteed to give the best statistical information was the United Nations Human Rights. And there's a guy there who I recommend if you ever want to find out a bit more about what's happening statistically. His name is Ray Dolphin, he's from Ireland, and he collates all the information on people who conflict, say in Gaza, how many border crossings occurred, how many medical crossings occurred, how many were prevented. He's got all that information. And it's people, part of my job is to find people like him,
right,
whose work is transparent. And his work is completely, it's really, I'm sure you could find reproach in it if you wanted to. But for me, his work is really above board. He'll show you the methodology he uses, he'll show you how he assessed all this stuff. And actually it's the transparency, I think, that is really one of the key things about when you look for information. It's about the transparency of the sources, which are really important.
How does an organization like yours prevent another Martin? How do you maintain this level of trust while protecting yourself?
Well, there are a number of things that happened. There were multiple attempts to get into the organisation, and the second time it happened was basically there was an investigation. The police in Britain were investigating BA Systems and Saudi Arabia over bribery allegations, and Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, intervened and stopped the investigation. And myself and Nick and Anne took a court case against the police saying that they had acted wrongly in suspending the investigation. And we did a benefit gig that was great. We had this massive sort of 4,000-seater, and it was done at the old Hammersmith Odeon, which is now the Hammersmith Odeon, Apollo, and it had those lights you get outside cinemas and venues. At the front, it's got a serious attempt to get the police in the dock, and it sort of had all this stuff. And we actually won the first round of the case. But while we were doing the case, it became apparent BA Systems were registered as what was called an interested party. So they could get access to certain documents and aspects of the case. And they got in contact with Campaign Against Arms Trade lawyers, and their lawyers did, and said, we're very sorry, but we appear to have an email from Campaign Against Arms Trade in which your entire legal strategy is outlined. This is a real no-no in legal terms. The Campaign Against Arms Trade had been hacked again, not just infiltrated, it had been hacked, and they had their information. And so seriously was this taken by the lawyers that they had to come and tell us. And what we did was immediately take legal action. So that's the first thing. That's what we do now, is we take legal action, and we will get them to admit they spied. Campaign Against Arms Trade forced BA Systems not just to admit they spied, but to issue a public apology and to take a legal undertaking that they would not do it again, and if they get caught doing it again, they get huge fines.
Well, the UK is
Right?
very far
That's
ahead of
the first
us
thing.
on this front. Like in the US, like especially in environmental groups and a lot of direct action groups, I mean, the way it's dealt with, there's two ways. One is like lockdown, total privacy, you know, encrypted everything, a kind of very closed system. And the other is, and I just want to say flat out, like most of these people, if not almost all, okay, are not doing anything illegal, right? Just remember that in this conversation, these are people campaigning for change and advocating for change, that they're not planning drug deals and weird, you know, it's legal. What we're all doing is legal. So the other tactic that I think many people employ now is just total and utter transparency. Is not even trying to hide any of it. I mean, we don't have any encryption on anything. You know, when we started working against Monsanto, we got hacked every single day. Sometimes I had to change my password 10 times a day.
Wow.
And you know what my passwords were? Like, fuck Monsanto, fuck you Monsanto, fuck you Monsanto again, fuck you Monsanto again, number one, you know, number two, number three, number four. I mean, so I think transparency has been in the environmental movement, especially like our solution, because we cannot possibly compete with those corporations who are hacking us.
There are small steps that organisations can take as well.
Yes,
Which
many
is if
good
you've
ones.
got volunteers and you've got interns coming along, you can take small steps of just making sure that you have a social security number and that you refer that and reference it. A lot of and now Campaign Against Arms Trade do actually have small checks that they do. The police in Britain who are undercover, who are the undercover cops who are crossing between the corporate and the state lines, they very, very charmingly were using the names and identities of dead children as their cover names. And it's really grim. It is really grim. And
Jesus Christ.
they would go and research and get a cover name that had the same date of birth as they did, so that they could try and keep it as near as possible.
Partial lie.
And so what activists then started to do was just go, okay, we'll just check the names. Just go and look at the register for births, deaths and marriages, and we'll just check. And it's then that a few names started to come off that did not match.
Right.
Or you suddenly go, excuse me, but you died 30 years ago, you know.
Yeah.
And
I did.
Yeah, and it's a hard line
What?
because, you know, you're a creative person, right? So paranoia is the opposite of creativity. It's the total opposite of creativity. And so when you're planning campaigns and activism, you know, you don't want to shut down your creativity. And I think that those little checks are good. It's insidious the way it comes in.
But also the thing is actually all of our work is built upon getting people to come and join in and to contribute.
Yeah.
And actually the idea that collectively that is where our power and our soul lies.
And most people are not spying, actually. So that's
It's good that
great.
you realize that that's the risk you face, because you realize, I'm a CEO of a large company, and you know these companies that you're targeting, they have unlimited losses. In other words, I mean, they will do anything they can to stop what you're doing, because to you, it's, you know, you can only lose so much or whatever, but they have unlimited downside. So the reality is they're going to put a major, you know, I'm surprised BAE didn't, if it wasn't more effective, you know, because they have unlimited budgets to fight you. But we're going to dinner, so we have to go.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Close it right there.